I remember a lot about Mark.
He could do everything.
Great guy all around and was
I
nice
was
with.
in awe of
It was nice, man. It was nice
knowledge.
to
I
have this
admired my big
experience and
brother. I
have him
really
there.
did. I respected
Basically
him
loved
for
spending
everything.
time
He was a
with his
respected
family.
man,
He's
a
a good
great
friend,
colleague,
boy.
and I got
I
to know
chose to
Mark.
stay with him.
Very
This was
successful.
great person.
A few years ago.
Loved his children more than anything.
How do you sum up a person's whole life in a few minutes?
You can't. But we're going to try. Mark was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana on September 27, 1950, to two hardworking parents, Robert and Thelma.
The backdrop of our lives and Mark's life was my father, who was a veteran of World War II of the Army Air Corps. He had quite a harrowing story and probably was the reason he had the outlook he did and different attitudes about different things, including eating all the food on your plate. He was shot down over Germany in January of 1945 and was a prisoner of war and was liberated and came back home May of 45. 2 years later, got married on the same day he returned, or the anniversary. He saw some bad things in World War II, the loss of life, the deprivation, and then I think he wanted to come back and have a life full of life.
The second of 11 children, Mark had an interesting childhood.
Hobson Road. It was our first home we lived in. And of course, Dad built most of the house. He bought the house like an empty shell. He and our mother, Thelma, moved in. 1950, she raised two children with no running water in the house and no electricity when they were little. So it was not easy when they started out, and they had some rough times.
In only a few years, more children would arrive into the Putt family, a trend that would continue for over a decade.
There's some benefits from a big family in that the older kids help raise the younger ones. But sometimes you get lost in the mix.
Yeah, what was it like to live in a big family? There were always people everywhere and babies everywhere.
Despite there being little room for individual attention, Mark had a great love and respect for his parents.
He just really respected Dad because Dad just worked his tail off, and I think that's where all of his siblings got such a good work ethic. It just trickled down upon us.
Mom was very attentive. She was the person who ran the Cub Scouts, 4-H, the Girl Scouts. She would be involved in all the schools. She would make lunches for everybody every day.
Everybody just loved Mom because Mom was like Superwoman and the sweetest person on earth.
Even though there were 11 of us, there were special moments for each child that she would make sure that person didn't feel like he or she was part of a herd.
We enjoyed a lot of things that we didn't really appreciate at the time. We had dinner the same time basically every night, and almost every kid was at the table.
We had a round table. Now, Dad and Mom usually sat together on one side, and we just filled in on the other side. But that way they could look at all of us directly across the table, and it was a unity time with our family. And that's probably why our family's so strong today.
Early on, unsurprisingly, Mark often palled around with his only older sibling.
In the mid-50s, we'd go Halloweening. In those days, you could go 2 nights, and people would actually open their door and give you stuff. We'd collect grocery bags full of candy. And we'd go by ourselves at that age through the whole neighborhood. And we had gone out without permission, but I said, Mark, we got to make sure that Mom doesn't smell candy on us. So Mark's in there in the bathroom. He's just washing his mouth out with water and all. And Mom comes in, have you boys been smoking? we got busted, but it wasn't because of smoking.
Christmas morning, Mom and Dad would be up all night wrapping presents and all that kind of stuff. And at the crack of dawn, Mark would be up racing through the house, all excited and getting everybody up. Mark had an ornery side to him. When he was learning how to play the baritone in middle school,
He went after them like he was a monster and baritone right in their face.
He would chase me with the baritone, and I would just cry and scream because I was only 4 or 5 years old. And he just thought that was so funny.
One of our infamous Easter egg hunts, we were at the Maysville Road house. Rex was walking up toward the house on the patio. Mark pulled a jelly bean out and said, I'm just going to fling this at Rex. And this was at least 100 to 120 feet away. And he whips it out and it hits him right in the head. And Rex turns around and says, thanks. Mark said, I was just trying to throw it at you. Your head just attracts things. Mark was a little ornery and showed that and showed his athleticism and then the sense of humor at the end of it. So that's still one of my favorite stories.
I learned counting, reading from my two older brothers, especially Mark. He was a good teacher as a child.
As brothers and sisters, there's a lot of things that we experienced with Mark. He was just a good brother to admire, a good older brother.
Mark went into 5th grade when we moved away and moved to Forest Park.
He had to get up early to do the paper route.
My brother would get up in those cold, icy mornings and deliver newspapers so many times on his bike.
All that work for the little pittance they got. But on the other hand, that was real good life lesson for him.
He was just a true role model. We were at scout camp together, and I was just young, and I was scared stiff. If Mark hadn't been there, I don't know what I would have done, but I'm pretty certain I wouldn't have made it the whole camp. They would have had to send me home. But he was just there to make it more comfortable for me.
He achieved Eagle Scout, and that just shows his perseverance and his determination. That's not an easy thing to achieve, so that kind of carried over to later in life.
He just had good experiences with it when he was a kid and felt that it taught good skills. I know he was very proud the day that I also received my Eagle Scout Award.
As Mark grew, so did his scientific mind and his drive to learn about the world.
He's always exploring and inventing things. For some reason, he decided he's going to save his dandruff. So he's in there shaking his head upside down on a piece of paper. And we'd walk by his bedroom and go, "What are you doing?" "None of your business," typical brother response. Then we saw him pour it into a little jar. Then one day, I came home from school, and the house smelled like dead flesh. It was the most repulsive smell you could ever imagine. He was in his bedroom, set up his own little lab, and was burning his dandruff to see what was going to happen. He was curious about what's the reaction to mixing some stuff together, whatever it was he was mixing. And he always had that curiosity. I don't know what the results of that test were, and I didn't care.
When he was younger, he liked to make rockets and shoot off rockets. And it's kind of risky because he had one go off in his face.
Mark comes running in. I can't see. And I'm all panicked and run off to see what's going on. And thankfully he has glasses on, so I pulled his glasses off, and his glasses were just coated with the residue from the rocket propellant. Scared me to death. Mark too, but he wasn't afraid to try that stuff.
Mark's father had built up a decent business painting houses and often employed Mark and his brothers to help.
We both started, I think, when we were freshmen or sophomore in high school. We probably worked together for 5 or 6 years. We learned the basic rules of painting, and we had some interesting times with our father and our uncle. It was always entertaining.
It was some good times.
Mark's story can't be told without Rhonda's story. The two have been intertwined for nearly 5 decades.
We were both going to go on a 6-week European tour called a study league. A week before we left on the trip, Mark and I met in a swimming pool. Mark was diving off of the diving board doing fancy flips, trying to impress us. We just kind of ignored him, and then pretty soon I felt something swim up out of the water and started talking to us. Then when we were going to Chicago to fly out for the trip, there was a pilot strike. They had to bus everybody to some dorm at a college in Chicago. We ended up staying there about 3 days. We got to know each other quite a bit better, and on the 4th of July, we went up to the roof. We watched the fireworks from there, and when they were over, everybody got up to leave, and he said, "Let's just sit here for a while." That was the place where we had a first kiss. So we kissed before we even left for our trip. And if my mother had known that,
We were going to take Mark to Chicago, and all the way over there, he couldn't stop talking about this outstanding girl. He said, "She's just perfect. You guys, wait till you meet her." I never saw Mark so excited. He was almost giddy. I can say without hesitation, he was in love with her already.
while we were there at the dorm, there was a grand piano in a lobby area. I had just played earlier that year for a recital, and I had learned this wonderful Liberace song. I played that for him, and he just sat there, his mouth dropped open, and that's when I think I had him. He was very impressed with that. We went through Europe 6 weeks, 5 different countries. I spent quite a bit of time with him walking around, seeing the sights. When we were staying in Spain, our last country to visit, they had a really nice swimming pool there that we took advantage of a lot. And I had this yellow bikini outfit. He seemed to just love that. I never thought I would ever see him again after the trip. He lived in Fort Wayne and I lived 30 miles north. When we were flying home, we sat together on the airplane and he was telling me all about all of his brothers and sisters. And then he asked for my address. And I thought, well, why would he even ask? He's not going to ever see me again. But I gave it to him. Lo and behold, the next day after we got home from the trip, I went to town with my mother. And when we came back, there was a strange car sitting in our driveway. We didn't realize who it was until we pulled in, and there he was, standing there talking to my uncle. I always got a kick out of that because he couldn't even stay away from me for one day.
I remember going to the airport to pick them up, and he had this big smile on his face, and there's this little girl following him.
My mom said, "What? Who is that girl?" And she was trying to figure out who it was because she had no idea who it was.
After my mom met him, she was so impressed with him. He was a college boy. He was from a nice family. He was so intelligent and kind. She thought this guy would be a great catch for my daughter. My dad felt the same way. He got a kick out of Mark. He always called him a Jayhawk. The very first time that Mark took me to his parents' house, we got out of the car, and as we were walking towards the door, a bird did its job on my head. I was so embarrassed, and Mark felt so bad for me, and his mother felt so bad for me. She took me right into the kitchen and put my head under the kitchen sink, and she washed that out of my hair.
That's when she and Mom really clicked, because Mom helped her clean her hair and she was just meeting them. And Mark, I think, was embarrassed, but what can you do, you know?
I just loved Mark's parents. They were awesome people. His dad was a happy guy and he complimented everybody. He made me feel really special. His mom was just a beautiful soul. She was happy all the time and she was so welcoming.
She was just the perfect person to marry. She had her act together. She had her education. She was very brilliant, common sense, everything good. And he could sense the family really accepted her from the beginning.
That's just the kind of person she was. She was easy to approach and very high on life, I think. Just had a good outlook on things.
He was happy. He knew he found the woman that he wanted to marry. He didn't come out and say it, but you could sense it.
When Mark would come home, it was probably a Saturday night or something, and he drove all the way up to DeKalb County, and then he would come back, and he'd probably get home midnight, 1, 2, whatever it was, and he'd be singing. He'd be just as happy as could be, and my assumption today is, well, yeah, he was coming back from seeing Rhonda, so he was, but I could just hear him singing. It wasn't just once, it was a lot of times, and just walking in and probably, woke me up in the middle of the night.
I can remember having dinner at the Putt household with all the kids sitting around a huge round table. If ever there was a second of silence, everybody would just start laughing because it was such an unusual event to hear some silence in that house. Sometimes I would go home from there from a meal and think, I'm still hungry because I grew up on a farm. He would come up and my mom would always fix T-bone steaks. He had never had T-bone steaks before. He would eat 2 at a time. When we were first dating, he would come in with his briefcase and we would sit on the couch in the living room and hold hands while he would read his big fat chemistry book. And then he would leave and I would stand there looking at him driving up the hill as he left through the picture window, and my mom would come in and say, well, that was a great date, wasn't it? But I thought it was because I was with him, and that's what I wanted to do, I guess. So even though we never went anywhere because he didn't have any money to take me out, but it didn't matter. That's what we did. His Chevy Impala was really a piece of junk. It barely made it up the hill near our house, and he would go so slowly I was kind of embarrassed to ride in it, but that was all he had.
He had a Chevy, he was going to paint it, and he painted it with a paint roller.
Thing was all rusted up, and so his dad had some paint left over. He painted this lime green, and I mean, he did a good job. I thought that was the original color, but it wasn't. But you could always find his car in the parking lot.
He would bring his 12-string guitar up, and we would go out in the front yard and sit underneath a tree, and he would serenade me. I can remember him singing Michelle, and I thought, this is the dreamiest thing ever. I was a cheerleader at my high school, and Mark would come to some of my games. He would always wear his university letter jacket, and he would stand out in the hall and wait for me, and I would just be beaming with pride because I thought I was so special to have this handsome, smart college, athletic letter jacket wearing boyfriend. He would just be standing there, leaning against the wall, smiling when I walked down the hall after the game. I was really proud of that. We got married on June 22nd, 1974, in the church right next door to where his family lived. We had a candlelight ceremony.
Friends, we are gathered here in the presence of God to witness the marriage of Mark Putt and Rhonda Stackhouse.
I could tell he was really nervous, and it would just surprise me so because he was always such a confident person, and I just never dreamed that he would be nervous. And then that made me nervous.
I love you, Rhonda, as I love no other. I take you to be my wedded wife.
I love you, Mark, as I love no other. I take you to be my wedded husband.
I now pronounce you husband and wife.
We had some friends sing, and Wally played the guitar, and one of my friends sang a song that Mark actually wrote himself for me for the wedding, and it was beautiful.
I know he fell in love with Rhonda from the beginning.
In the end, it was probably the greatest decision he ever made in his life and the best thing ever happened to him. We were really glad he found Rhonda.
Everybody said, you're too young to get married, you don't know what you're doing. We were married for 45 years. I did know what I was doing.
Okay, I have to make a little side point here. Now that we're firmly in the 70s, I have to say that was a fantastic time for Dad's facial hair. Now that we're actually really perusing through his old pictures, oh man, I did not realize the mustache, the beard, the sideburns. I mean, epic man. Anyway, sorry, we're back.
It was more than just being able to do a little bit of everything. He was good at everything.
Mark was very organized and planned everything out. It explains why he always got good grades and different things like that.
He was going to go to college at IPFW, and of course he went to college, he was like 17, and so he needed a place to study, and he built the study office in the barn. He had insulation, he had all the power and had the lighting. He put a fan in. He said, I was going to be doing experiments in here. I might need a exhaust fan to pull it out. And I had all the outlets and had a heater he'd put in there. And that's kind of where he studied for college for 3 or 4 years. Back then, you had to have the phone company hook up phones. Well, that didn't stop him. He had a phone set out there, and he ran a phone line along the power from the house to the garage to the barn, tapped into the existing phone line coming into the house. I think eventually we had like phone problems, or the phone company figured it out. They came out and disconnected him, but I think he used that for a while. And so
he absolutely would not hire somebody else to do something that he could do himself. So we were always busy.
He would be out spraying weeds on 3 acres by hand, and he would spend a half a day out there. He would come in, he'd be all drenched, and I'd just shake my head. I said, "Why does that even matter, Mark?" He says, "Because I don't want this place to look like a pigsty."
He just always wanted to be busy. He always wanted to be accomplishing something. So when there was nothing really to be done, he would create something to be done.
No matter what it was he was doing, it had to be perfect. That was just him. I was going to college, and Mark was starting his career. We had our house that we took care of. We were remodeling it all the time. We had a garden. Mark loved to garden, and we planted strawberries, bushes, sunflowers. I was very surprised after we got married to learn how handy he was. He built a shed. Actually, at our first 2 houses, he built sheds. One day I came home and I heard loud pounding and I had no idea what it was. And I ran back to the back of the house. Mark was tearing out a wall from the bathroom. I was just mortified because I had no idea he knew how to do construction or anything. He said, "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." And I said, "Well, I sure hope you do because you just ruined this room." Much to my delight, he ended up making this beautiful bathroom like twice as big as what it was. He could do anything: plumbing, electrical work, construction, painting, anything.
He was so skilled in so many areas.
He was very meticulous. I was never quite as good and detailed as he was, but I've kind of followed his lead. So if I had questions, I knew I could ask him, and he would know. He was very good at the remodeling and detail work.
We basically remodeled 2 whole houses, and I always helped him as much as I could, but he was the brains behind it.
Now, this is a classic Putt male thing. Dad was up on ladders all the time. He'd be up on a scaffold or some rickety plank or something crazy. We'd be down below thinking, "Oh, this isn't going to be good."
What do you think of this setup here, Shell?
You're an idiot.
Thanks. That's a nice thing to say about your father.
If you couldn't find him, usually you'd just look outside and he'd be out there planting something, or if he wasn't planting something, he'd be chopping something up or grinding something. It was kind of ridiculous, really. He'd complain sometimes about how hard he worked out there, but he enjoyed it because he was always doing silly stuff.
We wanted to move out into the Northwest School District. We decided to just build something brand new so that we didn't have to do that anymore. We designed the house ourselves. We did the landscaping ourselves, designed all the landscaping beds. We rented an auger, and he and my dad made the holes for every single bush and every single tree, and there were a lot of them. We put in almost all of those plants in just one weekend.
Both my father and mother really loved to help people. Anytime pretty much anyone needed anything done, they were there helping.
Really, he would give you the shirt off his back. If you were in need, he would be there to support you.
His nature to help was habitual. He couldn't stop it. It wasn't about helping, it was about bonding. It was about showing love through action. To me, it seemed like one of the things he really enjoyed.
Throughout his life, Mark was known to be a naturally gifted athlete.
Mark had a lot of athletic ability that the rest of us didn't. He was a very good jumper.
He was the most athletic of all of us, much more fast twitch than the rest of us, and being ambidextrous.
He would lift weights, and he would roll up his sleeve and flex his muscles when they were just huge and as hard as rock.
We'd go out and play football games. It's usually Mark and I against Dean and Rex, because we had that little football you could throw about 70 yards, and about every other play was going out for the long bomb.
When we were younger, my dad got us a pony, which was kind of wild, and Mark was the only one that would ride it. When he was younger, he was a daredevil. He did the pole vault, and that scared me silly, watching him pole vault going upside down, and Mark didn't flinch, and he loved it.
When he was at Snyder, he went out for the track team, and they needed a pole vaulter. Nobody knew anything about pole vaulting, but one of the coaches said, "Well, would you want to give this a try?" And Mark said, "Yeah, I'll give it a try." He basically taught himself to pole vault. None of the coaches knew anything about it. Again, that is not an easy athletic event.
Back then, you didn't have a good pole to pole vault with, but he still had the school record at Snyder.
He could have just been a super athlete if they would have had good coaches back then. And that's something I know he regrets, and I would like to have seen how good he could have been.
And something he taught himself to do, and that's just what he does. If he wants to do it, he figures out how to do it. Basketball is in our blood because our dad was nuts about it. He always played in some kind of industrial league or a lot of times the church league. We'd go down to the gym and watch him.
At our family gatherings, for years, it was just basketball games, and I just loved that. Some games actually got pretty competitive.
He was a good role model as far as basketball. Just by trying to emulate Mark, I got pretty good in basketball myself.
I was jealous of Mark because he could shoot with either hand, being ambidextrous. Wish I had that natural talent.
He was a basketball player. He just loved basketball. And of course, he played for IPFW.
When he was in college, my parents would go with me down to Fort Wayne and watch him play basketball. I could just tell my parents were so proud that their daughter was dating, a college basketball player.
We were together at Indiana Purdue, Fort Wayne for 1 year. He did more playing back then. I was just a freshman who was just learning the tricks, and just watching him play and spending time with him during that was incredible as well. I'm not sure he ever knew that I enjoyed that much. I probably didn't really tell him like I should have, but I want his family to know how much I appreciated that.
What I loved about it the most was back then they wore those little short shorts when they played, and so you could really see what their legs looked like, and he just had the greatest legs.
Here you go, ladies.
We did play a lot in summer league and some of the winter leagues. That was really enjoyable. It was Rod and Mark and I, and then sometimes Neil played in those. Rex played in some of the summer games. I think that was just part of our life. We didn't really appreciate at the time that we wouldn't be doing that forever. So we really enjoyed that.
We just had a couple fabulous teams when we were clicking, and we won the championship, got beat a few times, but we played together for several years because he played until he's well in his 40s.
It didn't matter if it was a college ball game or an industrial league ball game or a pickup game with family or friends. Dad wanted to win, and he was not happy when he did not win.
He was intensely competitive.
Intensely competitive. It got him into trouble sometimes.
Trouble. That's exactly what I was about to say.
Mark had a pretty short fuse. He'd get mad the quickest in games, so we'd usually have to calm him down a bit. But that was his nature. I think that was why he had that thirst for learning, because he just needed things to happen.
I remember a summer league where if anybody had played basketball in Fort Wayne, they remember the referee, Tom Knox. And Tom was a great ref, and we all kind of knew him from basketball. And Mark was kind of on the bench watching the game and said, "Tom, you sure are sucking tonight." And Tom looks at me and says, "Well, what does that mean?" Mark says, "That means you suck." And so he got a big T on that one. It probably changed the course of the game. And Dad looked at him like, "Mark." And after the game, I remember Mark going up and apologizing to Tom.
We'd do these wild deep shooting competitions and hook shots, throwing our arms out. But really for us, it was all about the free throw. I'm not a bad shooter, but I can count on one hand how many times I beat him in these free throw competitions we had. He would toy with me sometimes. Well, I'll do this one right-handed. Or he would alternate. He would shoot his right hand and then his left hand. I was like, "You jerk." And he'd make like 9. I was like, God, it's crazy to think about. I mean, his record against me was 44 in a row. How do you beat that?
We started becoming season ticket holders for the IPFW basketball team many years ago. Mark just loved watching the basketball games, and I loved basketball. We never, ever missed a home game, ever. The alumni players were recognized at halftime during one of the basketball games. Mark's older brother, Randy, was there. Mark went out, and he was the only one who took his letter jacket and held it up when they introduced him, and it was really cool.
As a child, Mark excelled in school, earning many awards and achievements at every level.
His family moved several times, so he attended several elementary schools. He went to Lakeside Junior High School and was the second graduating class at Snyder High School. It was a brand new school. Mark started college in 1968 at IPFW. He graduated in 4 years with a degree in chemistry in 1972.
In his first year of college, Mark met Carl Kleber, who had become a lifelong friend and business partner.
I've known him for over 50 years. We spent our careers together, of course. He's had a big impact on my whole life. This is 1967. We both had gotten scholarships as Journal-Gazette paper carriers. We're still next to each other. I thought that was hilarious. It's like we were destined to work together. First impression I had of Mark, we were in a math class together. It was Professor Tullifson, and he was going through on the blackboard some math, and all at once, Mark stops him, stands up in the middle of the class while all this guy's looking at him and says, "That's not right. You're doing this wrong. That's not the way to do it." We're all kind of looking at him. Here's this lowly freshman telling this professor that he should be doing it this way. And actually, Mark was right. I had to agree with him. That was my first impression that I like this guy. He's got a lot of guts. So after that, I started chumming around with him because I liked his stance on life. I guess he wasn't afraid of anything. Let's put it that way. He wasn't afraid to tell the truth and stand up for what was right. I really admired that in him.
He was always very, very smart, and luckily he was in school ahead of me because when it came time for taking physics, I happened by some accident, looked in the desk drawer, we were sharing a bedroom, and found his old lab books. Boy, my lab work was outstanding that year. It was because of Mark, because it wasn't because I was that intelligent in physics, because I did take a few peeks at his lab books.
I never knew it, but he maintained a diary. I walked in one time, he was busy. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm writing my diary." I said, I didn't know he had a diary. I looked at it and I said, "Well, what do you write?" I can't even read it. And he said, "Well, I created my own alphabet. I'm writing it all in code so nobody can read it." But he could write it as fast as he was writing normally. He was so good at that code.
He was extremely well read. He was always reading something if he wasn't busy doing something.
He's somebody who knew something about everything. I mean, in his free time, he read National Geographic. He read Discovery. Anything historical he was always interested in.
Mark is the only person I've ever known who probably read every article in National Geographic. Most people would just look at the pictures or maybe the captions, and Mark would lament the fact that, oh, he's behind on his National Geographics. Go, really, Mark?
He could talk intelligently with just about anyone on just about any subject.
His knowledge of music and trivia and everything was always so impressive. I don't think I ever caught up with him either. He just had a very broad base of knowledge and always wanting to learn more.
He tended to remember just about everything he read. Because of that, we always said he knew a lot about a little and a little about a lot.
A walking encyclopedia. I called him my Google. I never had to look things up because all I had to do was ask him and he knew the answer.
He not only had so much knowledge about all these different topics, he was involved in those things too and had a history and accomplishments in all of those things.
He was interested in hearing other people's experiences too. That was one of the things that surprised me the most about Mark as I was getting to know him. That was really special and really made me feel welcome in the family.
We would sit and have dinner and we would talk about everything. We would talk about the world, nature, what we learned that day, history. I really valued that.
I think it's rare these days for a family to come together for evening dinner. And we did that almost every single day of the week for years and years and years.
Always there was a conversation about current events, science, about philosophy, always. I think that came organically.
He was so engaging. He had that ability to sit with anyone and bring them into a conversation and made them feel comfortable.
He let me explore ideas that I knew could be wrong. He was open to let you learn by exploring ideas with him. He made it fun, and anyone could participate. And sometimes we would find pathways that he had not explored yet, and that was a really special experience because he was curious. He had to know. And first he would speculate. He wouldn't just dive and go find the answer on Google. He'd be like, well, let's think about it.
He gave to more than a dozen different charities on a wide range of things.
That's one thing that I loved about my dad. He was not a perfect person. Nobody is. But man, he cared about the welfare of the planet, the animal kingdom, the welfare of people. He cared about it all because he wanted to see it continue. Full stop.
In our family, all 5 of us graduated from IPFW.
When I graduated college, my father decided that he would don his PhD robes for probably the first time, and that became somewhat of a tradition, as every time one of his children graduated, he would don his PhD robes, so he could sit there with us, being bored out of his mind.
I think we all took it for granted at the time, but it was really cool that he was there for us in that way. And I have a fond memory of him shaking my hand as I was walking off with my new diploma.
When he graduated, Mark and Merv Porter were very good friends and very good chemists. I quit my job, came to Fort Wayne, and they had just gotten a house up in Cherubusco, so I moved in with them. Mark and Merv both got motorcycles. That was to save gas because it was a half-an-hour trip. So we were starting motorcycling it back and forth, but I didn't have one, so I would ride on the back of the motorcycle with Mark back and forth. That was always exciting. Of course, Mark, I'd be hanging. Mark would rev her up once in a while. I fell off the back of that thing a couple of times. He was going down the highway. He'd kind of give me a little scare once in a while.
In 1972, Mark began his career in dental research, conducting lab work for major dental companies.
Dr. Mueller was one of the inventors of Crest toothpaste, and that was his claim to fame, and he hired Mark on first.
Mark took the vision beyond what Dr. Mueller had. He really wanted to better the industry, really develop products. That was his passion.
The first 13 years that we were there, we were really part of the IU School of Dentistry. We were called the Preventive Dentistry Research Institute. Mark and I, of course, our desks were together our whole careers, side by side. We only had enough money to pay for one phone, so we shared the phone, which actually was very good because we always knew what was going on with his project. He always knew what was going on with my projects, and we talked and bounced things off each other. It was really a good working arrangement. We did finally get an actual office in Kettler Hall with windows, and that was like we've made the big time here. We actually have a desk. Desks were still across from each other, but we had room for stuff now.
I was a dental hygienist. It was very difficult to get a job. And one day I got a call from Mark, and he said that they were doing a clinical. Would I be willing to come in and clean the teeth of the children they were doing this clinical on? And I thought that was great. So I went in. I fell in love with the people at the lab. When the clinical was over, I said, I would love to work for you. And I told that to Mark. And that was 46 years ago. Lo and behold, a couple months later, I got a call from Mark, and he said, we're looking for somebody in the lab. Would you like the job? And I just took it for all it was worth. Mark is such a patient man. He was a gentleman. He was just so into what he was doing. I was in awe of him because I knew he had a degree in chemistry, but he knew so much, even more than I did, of the dental aspect.
Mark was the first one in our group to get a patent. It was with a prophy paste that ended up being sold under the trade name of ProCare. Mark single-handedly developed the whole thing, invented a prophy machine to do all the testings and everything. Actually, his master's thesis is kind of based on that whole development project.
He put a lot of himself into his work.
He had respect for everything that we did for the product or the data that we generated. He had respect for the sponsors we worked for. He had respect for us, and decisions that he made were for our best interest.
A lot of people thought he was a very serious guy, and he was. He was a very hard worker, no doubt about that.
Mark was always kind of the mediator. He would keep us in line, which was a good thing because we needed to be kept in line. That's what gave us balance. We grew together. We grew up together and realizing what was necessary to get the job done and wanting to do it right.
He had a very human side to him, too. He wasn't this scientist that was a nerd, you know what I mean? He also liked to play hard, too. When the time came to play, he could let his hair down.
I remember often him laughing and just having a good time.
It was kind of like working for your older brothers, the fun things that we did. We'd take some lunch breaks and go out and throw the Frisbee or the gum spitting contest.
With some of the clinical trials that we had with Wrigley, or it might have been with Fertin, we had hordes of chewing gum sitting around the lab. We had a competition spitting chewing gum. What we would end up doing is everyone would grab gum and chew for 10, 15, 20 minutes, to get that bolus the right size and consistency. And we would stand, 25 feet back, and we had a trash can back on the other side of the lab. And we'd all get up and take turns and attempt to put the chewing gum into the trash can. We were keeping tally on the back side of the door. We would do that for weeks on end until we actually got 100 shots in. Mark was really competitive. Actually, Carl was too. It was funny. We would just laugh and laugh and laugh. We had a real good time with that.
We were like brothers after all those years. There's just no way around it. It was a good life. I really enjoyed my career with him. He was doing some collaboration with some of the professors over at University of Amsterdam, talked with Bob Tenkate, explained to him the situation, and Bob said, well, why don't we do some collaborative research here? Why don't you guys just join the university here? Mark approached me and said, would you think you'd want to do this too? And I said, well, yeah, if we can pull it off, We put together a whole series of research projects. We looked at what aluminum would do in gingivitis on plaque, all these factors, and had a whole series of clinical trials that we did. The last part, we had to go over there and defend our thesis, and that was kind of exciting. We walked into this big hall. We're sitting there, and all these guys in these big robes and these hats, and they, hear ye, and they pounding on the ground with this big post thing, and they come marching in. We're all looking like, what is going on here? And they all sit up on these chairs up along the wall here. It looks like a big jury, and they're sitting there looking at you. And you're sitting like you're on trial. And then they just start asking you anything and everything, to defend your thesis.
It is the tradition there that the candidate for the degree have a support person. So I was his support person, and I sat in a chair right in front of him, actually. I had to just stare at all the professors who were throwing questions at him. Even though he couldn't see my face, I was there for support.
We both passed and then had a big party afterwards. It was like they're all ready for us. And we went in a hall and we partied and we had a good time then after that. That was a big day in our lives to finally get our doctorate after all these years. I never thought it would come to pass, but Mark never gave up on it. When we got our PhDs in 95, it's when Mark decided, hey, let's become our own entity. Mark is the president of the University Park Research Center. It became very successful. We worked with all the major companies. The first big one was S.C. Johnson & Son, makes Johnson's wax. Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Topps Chewing Gum, Fertin, Unilever, Colgate, Wrigley Chewing Gum, Cheeseboro Ponds.
That was probably an 85 or 90 clinical studies. None were run any better than what Mark did, that's for sure.
He had been someplace and found out that some other company would give code names to their studies, and he thought that was a great idea, like the red ball or the white star or something like that. We took it a step farther. No, we got eggplant, white lightning, alpha puppy, wild pineapple, moose tracks, yellow submarine, golden nugget, pumpkin spice, and finally Tin Man.
After studying and working with dental products for over 3 decades, Mark decided to create his own toothpaste and mouthwash. He and longtime colleague Mike Moore started Dentis Incorporated.
We formulated Dentis in our head a few years before we left IPFW, just realizing at that time all the testing that we were doing for these other companies and knowing that we basically had a toothpaste that was probably better than anything else out there on the market. And we decided then, what if we made it maybe more natural, used natural ingredients, and tried to present it in a high-end luxury package.
He was the real entrepreneurial one of our family. Kind of took after Dad a little bit in that way.
He had that daredevil experience in him from his younger days, and it just carried on and made him a good businessman when he got older.
Anything he went into, he thought about. He's very pragmatic, definitely had a compassion side, but his way he approached things was in a scientific mind.
I was always a little more cautious, I think, and he was a little more of a risk taker. Yeah, I'd kind of ride his coattails a lot of times on these ventures that I might normally not take, He was a great writer. He did become a reviewer for a lot of the major dental journals. He was really good at editing, and these editors at the dental journals knew that. He's really good at analyzing data and seeing shortcomings in research and making recommendations.
He felt like that was his way of giving back to the science, to his life.
During our 7th year, along came Carson. We were a bit surprised, but it was the best thing in the world, I know, for Mark. He loved that baby so much, and that's when we decided we're going to have several kids.
He was so good with us kids. Best dad ever.
The kids couldn't wait until Mark came home. They would stand at the door waiting for him and start jumping up and down when they would see him pull in.
Dad worked a lot, so we didn't see him a lot, but when we did, it was like the best part of the day. When he came home, I would always run and hug his legs.
When he would walk in the door, Carson would yell, "Tick-tock, tick-tock."
He would pick me up, and I'd, of course, want, "Tick-tock, Dad." Tick-tock.
Mark would hold him by his feet and swing him like a pendulum. He just loved that.
For some reason, I just thought that was the greatest thing ever.
Even though he worked a lot, he always loved his children. And when he was around, he would always play with us and sometimes hold us down and poke us more than we wanted to. But that was just kind of his style.
Yeah, he just got a kick out of messing with us all the time.
This tough guy's gonna work me over. God, he's getting so strong.
It's okay.
Happy birthday to you. Yours. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Dear Carsey, baby. Happy birthday.
He always carried Shelby up the stairs every single night to put her to bed on his back. Every single night.
Every night he would take me to bed on his back. It was our big thing. Every night we had to do it. I would get on his back and he would carry me up the stairs, and we'd get into the bedroom and he would always do acrobatics with me to get me onto the bed. He would flip me over into the bed, and it was our thing.
Our second house was on Cabot Lane. It was a ranch with a full basement. We stayed there for 8 years before we built our house in Burning Tree Addition. While we were starting to build our house, which took 10 months, we put our house on Cabot Lane up for sale. It sold immediately. That was about the time that Mark's father passed away. So we ended up moving in with his mother. We lived with her for about 8 months. Even though Mark was working really long hours, he never missed any of the kids' concerts or ball games or competitions, show choir competitions that went till midnight, and they were all day. I was so surprised that he would sit and watch show choirs all day long, but he would do anything for Shelby. The same thing is true for the boys who were in marching band. They would be getting home from contests at midnight. He would be there for them to pick them up.
He came to every single one of my shows. I did lots of musicals. He never missed one. He was always there.
He was ready to help us no matter what, no matter where we were going in the country. I mean, we would move all over the country and he was there helping us. It was incredible.
You take for granted that you're going to have that help because there was just no question that he was going to be there to help you.
My father and I often played pool, mainly to give us something to do, but also it gave us a chance to sit around and talk. And because of that, sometimes we would play for hours and hours on end. When I was in Florida, came back for about a week. In that week, we played over 140 games.
He also was a good model, along with my mom, for how to have a good relationship.
Mark was there when Austin proposed to me. Austin being Austin, there was quite a lot of lead up to that, and it was amazing. Mark and Rhonda and Carson and my family and friends were there and singing, actually, to us. I don't know that there's a better way to show support. Obviously, I think Mark was happy for me to join the family.
Mark, I felt like, came off as a really tough, strong guy when I first met him. And he had, just like Carson, very little emotion, just stoic. And as I got to know him, I saw this unexpected side of him, just this big heart and very sentimental. I feel like he was a dad to me, and I never expected that. One of the things we wanted with our wedding was for it to be a family gathering, for everyone to spend time together, to have a wonderful vacation together, and that's exactly what it was. I saw Mark floating around the pool with a drink in his hand. I've never seen him like that before. I saw dance moves from him that I've never seen in my life. It was just so wonderful. I'm grateful that he was there.
A father who loves his daughter as strongly as Mark loves Shelby is a terrifying man when it comes to someone who's trying to woo her. But he was incredibly welcoming and warm. I was terrified all the same, but I felt immediately embraced.
I couldn't have asked for a better husband to be a good father to our kids. We've had some wonderful travels in our lifetime. Mark went to many IADR meetings, which are all over the world, and many times I got to go with him, and they became vacations for us. It was just a great opportunity for us to travel the world. We went to Australia, England a couple times. Mark went to Acapulco, and many places throughout the United States, too.
We traveled as a family to quite a few places. I think it was important to him for us to see a lot of other places, be more worldly, such that we understood different places, different cultures.
We had a fabulous vacation with Mark's brother Dean and his wife Debbie. We actually drove down to Puerto Penasco in Mexico.
We stayed at a place for about a week. The whole idea was to relax and really do nothing for that whole week. So we kind of went down by the pool and the beach. And after about an hour, Mark said, well, is there anything else we get to do, or are we just going to sit around? So we determined that he had never actually relaxed and done nothing before. It was really hard on him. So we had to pick up some activities to keep the week interesting.
When we were in Australia, we went to this sand island and we rented a Jeep.
4-wheel drive, manual stick. And Dad has to be able to do everything, right? But he doesn't really drive a stick very often, especially not over super rough terrain. Like the whole point of this was to go over like really bumpy stuff so you can catch some air for a bit. And we stalled, I don't know how many times. And all these like teenage boys would drive by, stop, just laugh at us, and then keep driving.
At one point, it was starting to smell really hot, and I really think he may have damaged the engine on that little trip. Mark wasn't much of a collector of things. But one thing he really did like to collect was different hats. So whenever we would go to a different country or place, he would want to buy a hat as like a souvenir.
Music was a huge part of Dad's life. He especially loved the music in the 60s and 70s.
He loved to compose music, and he would sit and play those same little songs over and over and over for years.
We would just hear him singing in the house, and it was good.
Working outside, he would just be singing a song.
Dad had an incredible ear for notes, for chords, for harmonies.
He was the guy with the guitar and, was learning to play it, and it just was so cool.
He started his band really out in our barn at Maysville Road. And I remember seeing the neighbors come out with their lawn chairs and just sit and listen. You could hear them all the way down the road.
I used to go out and listen to him every night. And I remember one time I had a slumber party and I told all my friends about the band and everything. And then that was the night they didn't play. I was so disappointed.
The Beatles' Abbey Road had just come out, and we just clicked kind of right away because we both loved the Beatles. When we weren't playing the electric music, Mark and I would sometimes just jam on guitars. He had that nice 12-string Martin. That really kind of led into the next band that I was in with Mark. We called it the Acoustic Trio, and that was with a friend of his from IPFW, Merv Porter. Merv sang, Mark and I played guitars. We did have an electric bass. That was in 1973.
I first met Mark and Wally, and we just kind of clicked. It was like, hey, this sounds pretty decent.
We had a series of names early on.
Yeah, we had a whole bunch of names. We were the Legend. Basil Spazoff or whatever. We ended up as Pegasus.
We had to learn songs off of records and try to duplicate what you'd heard because none of us really read music. Everything was by ear. It was a very tedious process.
Every day. We practiced every day in that barn. But that literally made us who we were. Had we been a typical garage band, practiced once a week maybe or so, I don't think we would have ever achieved the tight harmonies and things that we had.
People know, of course, that he played bass, but I'm not sure everybody knows what a good singer he was. Singing was really important to him. I wouldn't have assumed that ahead of time.
He was a stickler for harmony.
Right. And I love that.
So many of the bands back then, you'd have one guy singing 90% of the lead, and nobody else would even have a mic. Mark was the driving force doing the 3-part harmonies, and we just practiced singing and singing and singing. There were times where it was frustrating because we'd say, oh, that's good enough, that's close enough. And he'd say, no, that's not,
That's for sure.
Just, you're too soft or you're too loud or you're flat or you're sharp or whatever. That really paved the way for the Life and Times harmony that a lot of people really complimented us on over the years. He engineered a lot of that. We became 3-piece in the summer of 1975. Most of our competition in those days were 4-, 5-, and 6-piece bands.
Mark would always say, we have as full a sound as any 4-piece band out there, so why do we need somebody?
People would often comment, I can't believe there's only 3 of you up there. It sounds like 5 people.
I loved the songs they played. And the 3 of them playing together, it was just the harmony that drew you in. All 3 of those guys had the talent.
He was busy up there. He was the sound man. The PA head was positioned over by him. So he controlled all the tones and the volumes and the channels. He was the one that had to keep the feedback down. And meanwhile, he's playing
Plus
bass.
all the foot
singing,
switches.
And had foot switches for his bass and foot switches for the lights. He was a busy guy up there. Invariably, there was this one couple that would dance right in front of us, but the woman would make a point of putting her finger over her ear like she thought we were too loud. That usually made Mark turn it up a notch or so. And
without a question.
So finally one time the guy comes over, leans into Mark and starts yelling at him, "You're too loud, you're too loud." And Mark just looks at him and goes, "I'm sorry, I can't hear you, we're too loud." You'll notice a lot of bands don't have a singing bass player because it's difficult to sing and play it at the same time. But he really had a knack for that.
Mark would go out of his way to make faces at me and just do all, and not to where the crowd could see it. He would turn
his back to the
and
crowd.
He would make the goofiest faces just to try to throw me off. And of course, many times he did. But
he was also known to alter the lyrics of songs at times. And
yes, he was famous for that.
And not in a way that's appropriate for family listening. Let's just put it that way.
At live shows, he would look right at me in the audience and he would say my name as part of the song. He would go, "Shadoop, Shelby-doo." He had several songs like that. Pretty Woman, there's a part where he sings "Mercy," but instead of that, he would say, "Shelby." It's just...
Mark had a band of the same 3 guys for 40-some years, and that's insane.
The reason we stayed together so long is because we became friends. We weren't just musicians that got together and jammed. We were friends.
When you get into a band, you get to know somebody, you put your ego off to the side. And if you don't do that, you're not going to play 40 years with the same 3 guys. It's not going to happen.
They wore matching outfits, and I used to dress up like them when I was a little kid because I wanted to be my dad.
You want to sing? Hey, that was good.
He actually started me on guitar. Really, he's the reason I am a musician. I couldn't have gone from this to this without his guidance and support. Dad was in his mid-60s and we'd never played in a band together, and I never thought it would happen. But Cadillac Ranch gave us that chance.
When we started playing out, it was so obvious that he fit right in. Plus, we're playing a lot of the stuff that he already knew. Most of the things that we played were things that he's played 1,000 times. Mark taught a lot of people a lot of things. And in the short period of time that I knew him, he taught me a lot. It was nice to have Mark's experience because I knew, number one, it wasn't the oldest guy in the band, but also I knew that he knew what was going on and everything that was happening was something that he'd experienced before. He kind of taught me that sometimes you just got to let things roll off your shoulders and not be over ticked off about anything that happens.
I was the third putt to join Cadillac Ranch. Mark actually beat me to it.
Everybody in the family, that was one of the coolest times, I thought. I enjoyed being the odd guy out, you know what I'm saying, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. But it was cool because it was like he would introduce us, you know, and it would be Austin Putt, Mark Putt, Elizabeth Putt, and Greg White. You know, so that was kind of funny, but I got a kick out of it. I thought it was cool, and I was so happy that it worked out that way.
That is one of those things that I just didn't even appreciate how unique and amazing it all was until it was over. There is nothing that compares to being on stage between your husband and your father-in-law and just having fun and helping other people have a good time. And Mark was great for that.
Cadillac Ranch has been around a long time, and I played in this band for a long time. And there's a lot of things this band's accomplished, but one of the proudest things about this band is when it comes to Austin and Mark being able to play together, that tops anything this band has done and will ever do.
I should have known playing with my dad in a band was super special, but it was just so normal for us. But then once it's gone, it's brutal. It's so hard.
Being in a band, it makes you part of a family. That's kind of the way that Mark's always looked at it himself, and that showed right away when I met him. He took me in before he was even in this band and treated me as if I was his son. You know, or maybe his cousin, you know, since I'm a little bit older.
He loved music, and, I credit him for drawing me into music. I'm not sure I would have played in bands all those years, you know.
Oh, me too.
He was sort of the motivator.
The guys played to make money, but they played because they really loved it.
He started having fevers. He would try to go down to the basement and work out, but he would just come back up and said, I just can't do it. I feel too weak. And he was admitted immediately. From that moment on, our lives changed. For the next 16 months, he was in and out of the hospital.
Then he got flown to the Mayo Clinic. We didn't know if he was going to make it or not.
If there's anything we learned from that initial experience, it's this. You have to have somebody looking out for you and advocating for you. It's very important.
You always get better care with more family involvement. We took him to the Mayo Clinic because they wanted to look at him and actually take samples to sequence to see how rare the cancer was.
It took several weeks before they finally determined what his condition was. It was so rare, it didn't even really have a name. It was in a category called myeloid proliferative neoplasm, not otherwise specified. Lying in a hospital bed in Minnesota, his only daughter's wedding was only a few weeks away. He was telling his nurses and doctors, I have to make it. I have to be at my daughter's wedding. I have to make it. He said it all the time.
Dad was so determined. All he wanted to do was to be at that wedding and walk me down the aisle.
It was very important to him that he got to see his daughter married, and I would never want to take that away from him.
We thought he was going to die. It was amazing that he was even able to do that.
I'll just put it in the words of my two best friends. It was badass that he was up on top of that mountain there with his daughter after knowing what he went through.
He absolutely never gave up.
His will was remarkable. Within a couple weeks, he was playing pool again. Within a couple months, he was shooting baskets again.
Bam! That was only the second try, just so you know.
Unfortunately, it didn't last.
When we found out he was sick, it was right around the time when we had planned to start trying for a child, and we didn't know how long Mark was going to have. It was so many emotions.
Once again, he's telling all of his nurses and doctors, I have to survive. I have to make it to see my grandchild. I mean, are you kidding me? That's what he wanted, like more than anything.
Yeah.
You know? And he was on the doorstep.
Yeah.
Could he fight through it? We didn't know.
Yeah.
This had happened before.
Yeah. The fact that he did get to meet her, that he got 4 months with her, it's more than we could have hoped for in the beginning.
In late May, we went down to the IU Med Center and met with a stem cell transplant doctor. It was really his only chance for a cure. He said that Mark would probably be a good candidate for a stem cell transplant. Mark was so happy. He had hope again that there was a possible cure. The doctor was so impressed that he had so many siblings. Normally, only 25% of siblings would be a full match. 4 out of 9 of his siblings that were tested were full matches. The other 5 were half matches. His younger sister, Jean, was the one who was chosen to be the donor, and I can't thank her ever enough for everything she did. She went through a lot of testing. On Monday of the week that he was supposed to go down to the hospital, the transplant doctor called and said he was not going to be able to have the transplant because his disease had progressed to acute leukemia. He had 89 blood transfusions and 26 platelets transfusions, and he was so very thankful to anybody who ever gave blood because he would not have survived as long as he did.
He built a family that when he was in the hospital, 24/7, someone was with him. Either his wife or one of his children were with him always for weeks on end.
He was looking so forward to more grandchildren and maybe a possible retirement someday. I could never get him to retire.
He was a smart, wise man, and over the years I've gone to him numerous times for advice and counseling. Just, what would you do, Mark? And he always seemed to have the right answer.
He was an incredible man, and I'm proud and privileged to have he and Rhonda in my life. I feel they're a gift that I was given, and I'm going to miss him forever.
As neighbors and friends, we will miss him deeply. Rest in peace, dear Mark. We miss you.
Gonna miss him very much.
If I had to boil it down to one thing that was the most important to Mark, it was his family. He loved all of us, and we loved him so much.
Mark loved his family. Everything he did was really for us.
Dad really wanted to make an impact on this world.
He was an intense player in this world. Everything that he did, he continuously pursued to see how good he could be at it. And you can only do that when you're being present.
He got a lot of pleasure out of being a great provider. He was a musician and a scholar. He's Grandpa Mark.
He would actually be quite mad right now if he knew he wasn't here, and he would be so happy to know that so many people were here to honor him. I wish he could see it.
Mark has left a legacy in his children, family, and friends. I really look forward to seeing who Mark is in the memories of all these people.
Dad was my friend and my confidant and my biggest fan and supporter. I feel a bit more empty now that he's gone.
On that day, I felt a great man has just left this planet. How unfortunate that we've lost this mind, because it was a great one.
Mark was my one and only. I never dated anybody else. I never wanted to date anybody else. I was always happy that I married Mark. I will miss him forever.
Dad, you wanted to survive. You were willing to fight through anything. You were willing to fight for those you loved and willing to stand up for what you believed in. You stood in awe of nature and loved life. You thought it was worth living. You always wanted to make an impact on this world, to make it a better place. Rest easy, Dad. You accomplished that.